We're talking about the Of the Decade awards here, so I don't know if you understand what this means. We're not talking about 2019. We're talking about of the past 10 years, okay? I just wanted to make sure you were up to speed.
Are you under the impression I don't know what decade means? What do you mean I'm not sure you understand this?
I just wanted to know, and I wanted to make sure. Listen, I had a tough time with this. I want to give you the floor first. Male Fighter of the Decade. I had so much trouble with this one, Chael. What did you go with?
Okay, for Male Fighter of the Decade, this is a little bit hard. And by the way, I was hoping Jake would maybe remind me of what I said, because I was in the same boat with you, right? I mean, you have to look at so many. And ultimately, I think that Daniel Cormier was the Male Fighter of the Decade. I really do, just because this champ thing is very real, in my opinion. And the fact that he covered the spread, went up, was a 2.5 to 1 underdog going in there against Stipe. I mean, these are very remarkable things, in addition to the fact that he carried a workload. He carried himself like a gentleman. He represented the sport. He's a high school coach at Gilroy, for goodness sakes. I mean, look, the guy, all the pieces of the pie, but most is athletically, and I think that's what we're talking here. I have Daniel Cormier.
Wow. Okay. You actually surprised me on that one. I will admit, not one of my finalists. Probably should have been. I thought about Demetrius Johnson, who broke the streak for most title defenses, broke Anderson Silva's streak. Of course, thought about Khabib Nurmagomedov, still undefeated, undisputed, dominant. And in the end, Chael, I just kept going back to Jon Jones. And I honestly broke all of my rules in doing this, because I tend to not lean towards someone for one of these pound-for-pound awards or best ever awards if they have a PD infraction, and multiple ones in his case. But in the end, if you look at the actual body of work and the things that he did in the cage and how long he has been dominant for, I mean, essentially he was knocking on that door at the beginning of the decade. He is still the champ. Here we are starting a new decade. I felt like I had to go with Jon Jones. Did I get this one wrong?
No, I don't totally disagree with you. And I understand your argument about the PEDs, and this maybe is coming from a former PED user, by the way, so I'm a little biased. But Jon did go dirty, but Jon also went clean. And whether you want to weigh that or not, when you talk about the body of work, there was a body of work. And even if he lived on the wrong side of the tracks a couple of times, he lived on the right side of the tracks. And if we're being fair in the assessment, look, the guy's dynamic. There's no way around it. And Ariel, to your point about Jon Jones, he's one of these rare guys that's cleaned out 3 generations. If you'll remember, when he was 21 and 22 years old, he was fighting the rampages of the world. He was taking out some of the guys of yesteryear, but then he went into the Rashad Evans of the world, took out his generation, and now he's going on to the next gen, the Anthony Smiths of the world. So it's a very good pick, and it's very hard to ever argue against Jon Jones.
All right. Okay. But I do like your Cormier pick, by the way. I do like that very much. And I think he has been somewhat forgotten because of the fact that he won the light heavyweight title when Jon Jones was out. But in the end, I see a lot of people picking DJ. I see a lot of people picking Khabib. I think worth mentioning also George St. Pierre, who won the middleweight title and walked away after that, and also walked away after retaining the welterweight title. Okay, here's another tough one for you, Chael. Another very, very controversial one in my opinion. I'm dying to know who you pick. Female Fighter of the Decade. Who'd you pick?
Okay, so twofold, but Fighter of the Decade. This isn't most impactful. You're getting to that. Fighter of the Decade. You can't go against Amanda. Come on, the greatest of all time, the greatest woman to ever done it. And I have to go back to my original argument. This champ thing is very real. For her to cover that spread, for her to be given that opportunity. Not to mention, if you look at some of the past work with the Bullet herself, I mean, this is really remarkable. If you were to come to the table with any pound-for-pound list or even a divisional, who the greatest of all time is, you're going to have an argument. If you come to the table with who the greatest female fighter of all time is, and you don't say Amanda, you're going to look foolish. You're going to lose credibility, Helwani.
Okay, so what about the argument that Chris Cyborg was undefeated for so long, and that Amanda, at one point in this past decade, she was 3-3. She was a 500 fighter. She was nowhere near, fighting for any kind of belt. She was losing to the likes of Sarah D'Alelio. What about that? It's not so much how you ended it, but the entire body of work. Did you consider Cyborg as well?
I fully agree with that, but I do think it is about how you end it. I subscribe to it's not how you start a race, it's how you finish the race. And yes, of course, you look at Cyborg, and I would even put Cyborg as far as number 2. But when you have your debate, and they had a head-to-head competition, Ariel, I think it's pretty clear. And by the way, I don't subscribe to the theory that Cyborg is past her prime or fought Amanda at the wrong time. I don't agree with that in the slightest. Cyborg's about to fight for a world championship, for goodness sakes. Don't tell me she was past her prime. That was a fair contest. Amanda won.
All right, so this one I actually actually agree with you on. I think it is Amanda Nunes, considering the fact that she beat Miesha Tate. She has the 2 wins over Valentina Shevchenko. She has the knockout of Ronda Rousey, and of course retired her as well. Has the knockout over Chris Cyborg. Has the finish recently over Jermaine Durandamy. First person to knock Holly Holm out in an MMA fight. Again, to your point, because I've seen a lot of people say, oh, it should be Cyborg because she was undefeated for the majority of the decade. It really is how you finish in many respects. And they fought each other. And she finished her in less than a minute. So how do you not go with Amanda Nunes? So we'll agree on this particular one. All right, now let's move along to male impact fighter of the decade. And what I mean by impact, and I have a feeling that you took it the same way. What I mean by impact is someone who just kind of changed the sport from a business perspective, from a fight perspective, someone that had truly the most impactful decade of any other fighter. Now we're talking about the males. We have a female one as well, but first let's focus on the males. Who'd you pick male impact fighter of the decade?
All right, Conor McGregor, and I know you love the decade thing, and you might not love that I say this because he doesn't span all the way back to 2009. And yes, I know what decade means, but Ariel, this guy was impactful. I mean, this guy made some waves. He came in his very first fight, announces into the microphone that Dana owes him a fight of the night bonus. Dana agreed, gave it to him. His next fight, I happened to fight on the card with him. His second fight ever in the UFC, I was in the card. He was undercard, but people in the arena were dressed like him. They were holding signs for him. They had made T-shirts for him. This was his second fight. By the way, Helwani, his third fight, he sold out an arena as a main event. Nobody has impacted the sport this quickly, aside from Brock Lesnar, but nobody has impacted it more than Conor McGregor.
Okay, let me ask you this. Did you even consider anyone else for this particular award?
Okay, Helwani.
Yes?
Helwani, I got a technical issue. What did you ask me?
Did you even consider anyone else? Did anyone even come close to Conor for this particular award?
No, absolutely not. Particularly when you put it in the category of male.
Right.
When you have female, I think you have a little bit more of a discussion. When you put it in the category of male, no, absolutely not. Look, he's moved the needle, Ariel. I used to have a couple of UFC records to brag a little bit. I lost them all. I lost them all to Conor McGregor. After I lost them, he came in, beat his own record, and beat his own record again. He has the live gate in 3 categories. He is the fastest sellout in 2 categories, one of which he just did for his pending fight with Cowboy Cerrone. He's got pay-per-view. This guy does everything. I live in the digital space, so do you. We see what his numbers do. No, numbers don't lie. That's what an impact is. It goes to Conor.
By the way, what were the other records that you had that he eventually broke?
Okay, I had the live gate record. Anderson Silva and I, part 2, did the live gate of 7.4 million. It was the highest in the industry at that time. It was the highest in Nevada at that time for mixed martial arts. He came in and crushed it. He actually beat it versus Chad Mendes. He came in and beat it again versus Jose Aldo, and now he's beat it again against Cowboy Cerrone, and that's just off the top of my head.
Okay, fair enough. By the way, did you think maybe like a collared shirt or something? You know, it's such a big day for me and the show. Like, just not like a T-shirt. Do you think maybe a collared shirt would have been nice on the award? I
must tell you, once I sat down and saw how fantastic yes, I do think we could have done like a Step Brothers type routine if you're familiar with the movie, and I could have come in a nice 3-piece as well.
Yeah, I mean, because I remember you were on the show last year, so maybe not a surprise. But listen, I want you to be you. I want you to be comfortable. I know you have to go mow the lawn after this, so I don't want you to get too dressed up after this particular one. Of course, I have to agree with you on this one. It's Conor McGregor, and to be honest, as you just essentially said, it's very hard to think of anyone else. Yeah, you could go with John Jones. He had a great year. Yeah, you could go with, GSP. Khabib is making an impact, but no one has ever made the kind of impact that Conor has made. I would say that he is the biggest draw in the history of the sport. I think the facts would back that up. I would say he is the face of the sport, despite the fact that he hasn't fought in a little over a year. His last fight was in October of 2018. I would also say that he is still the most popular fighter despite all the controversies in the sport right now. And I think a lot of people are jonesing to see him back. I do think there's one little difference this time around. I'm wondering if you've noticed it. I've noticed that the fans aren't 100% in. Like I'm noticing a big. I want to see it before I get back on the bandwagon. Like let's wait and see. Before we're fully back on his bandwagon, I'm noticing a lot of fans being a little trepidatious about being back as a Conor McGregor fan. Are you noticing that as well from the people?
I do see it here, but I just have to remind you, this is a law of physics. What goes up must come down. So to act as though Conor's not going to look like a stock market and have some waves and some balances and some peaks and some valleys, look, of course he's going to. However, there is a big pushback and a big question. Are people even going to come out for Conor? Has Conor lost all of his fans? Listen, they sold out T-Mobile Arena for a $10 million gate in what, and I quote, minutes. Yeah. We just can't argue with this. To act as though people aren't here and there isn't some intrigue. He also has the number one business rule in the world, which is supply and demand. He's been out for a little bit. Conor is red hot.
And a closet, or maybe not even a closet anymore, a closet big Ariel the Bad Guy fan. I'm told from his people he never misses an episode. And it's more because of you than it is because of me. So I'm sure you'd be very excited about that. How about female Impact Fighter of the Decade? Who'd you go with?
Okay, now this one goes to Ronda Rousey because for all the same reasons that I stated about Conor, when it just comes down to numbers. Look, a lot of what Ronda did was self-serving, but I don't blame her for that, Ariel. I say this as a fellow fighter. Everything we do is self-serving. If you leave something behind for the sport or you leave it better than you found it, that was just a byproduct of you trying to get yourself over. I think that a lot of the Ronda story was embellished. She was never the biggest star. She's never held a single record in the UFC. However, if we're being fair, who was the most likely athlete to end up on Ellen DeGeneres' couch? Who was the most likely to get on Jay Leno to get a message out? It was Ronda Rousey. May I name drop for you real fast? I sat and watched her fight Sarah McMahon. I was shoulder to shoulder with Will Smith. Will Smith was the most bankable and biggest star in all of Hollywood. I looked at him, I introduced myself, and I said, by the way, what brings you here? He throws his thumb up and points to his wife and says, my wife's a huge Ronda fan. She made me come out. She had to see Ronda fight in person. That's impactful. That's meaningful. That moves the needle. And that's something that she can leave behind for the other people to help pick up. I think she deserves a lot of credit for her career.
I'm happy you told us that story because for those who haven't seen Ariel the Bad Guy, you're good for at least one or two name drops each and every show. So there we go. We can cross that one off the list. I agree with you. It has to be Ronda Rousey. Let me ask you, though, the way she ended. You talk about, it's not about how you start, how you finish. The unceremonious exit, the two knockouts, the fact that she kind of just took her ball and went home. Did that at least come to mind when you were making this choice?
No, because I wasn't looking at his best fighter. I do admit I never thought that Ronda was the best fighter in the world. The division was just forming. She was in the right place at the right time. And that sounds insulting, but that's the way I see it. Ariel, I think she actually deserves a compliment. When she took her ball and went home, as you put it, I think that actually left a message. I think that decision looked kind of like a fine wine, and it got better with time in this way. When you've had enough in this sport, get out of it. Whether that means opening up your spot on the roster, or in her case, her spot in title fights and main events and giving that chance to somebody else, or just for her own sanity and physicality, if it's not what you want to do anymore, get out of the way. Don't go 1 foot in and 1 foot out. I think Ronda's decision, while judged and criticized at the time, I think it looks better with age, and I think that she made the right decision and helped to set a good example.
Interesting. All right. Fascinating analysis there from Chael P. I agree with you on that one. Okay, here's one more as far as the Of the Decade awards are concerned. A tough one because there are so many to choose from, so many different promotions, so many great fighters, so many great fights. In the end, there has to be one. Your fight of the decade. What was it?
Okay. Ariel, one term I've learned from you through 2019 is recency bias, and it's also something so true, and I have to admit that's a very real thing, and I'm very guilty of making the statement, Ariel, that was the best fight I've ever seen. A week later, Ariel, that was the best fight I've ever seen. But Ariel, it's been true. The sport's been getting better. The athletes have been getting better. The competition is getting closer and closer. And even though that is fall into the category of recency bias, I also think that it's accurate. I'm going Korean Zombie versus Yair Rodriguez. Not only is the best fight of the decade, is the best fight in the history of mixed martial arts.
Wow. That is quite a statement. That is an amazing statement. Now, I like the fact that you had to actually point to your ear. Is this your new thing to remind yourself that it's not Yair? Yair.
It's very hard for me to not put an extra R in there. May I tell you, just on a side note, do you know what? I have that fight as the number one fight of all time. Do you want to know what my number two fight is? You have to go back and see this. This is going to surprise you. Robbie Lawler fought at 19 years old, fought another 19-year-old named Aaron Riley. And it was in like 1999. I mean, this is way back. I was in college. That, at the time, I believed was the best fight. I think that fight is still the number two fight of all time that never got its credit. Wow,
okay. I like that. Perhaps people can find that one on Fight Pass or online. Great fight that you just mentioned. Great finish, of course. Fight of the decade, I'm not sure about that. In the end, I will go. So we'll agree on this. My fight of the decade was also my best fight, my favorite fight of all time in UFC and MMA history. It is Jon Jones versus Alexander Gustafsson, UFC 165. The first one, of course, Toronto, Ontario, Canada, September of 2013. The Air Canada Centre, now known as Scotiabank Arena. This, to me, Chael, was such an amazing fight to watch in person for a couple reasons. We had never seen Jon that vulnerable in a fight before. He had never been taken down in a fight before. You'll recall in the first round, Gustafsson out of nowhere takes him down. You'll recall going into that fight, no one gave Gustafsson a chance. Perhaps you recall going into that fight, the promotion for it was very bizarre. It was all about how tall Gustafsson was and how long he was. There was nothing to really say about this relatively unknown Swedish fighter. He comes out there with a great game plan, and it looks for a second like he might actually be stealing the victory. And of course, in the fourth round, the spinning back elbow rocks him, and that perhaps saves the day for Jon Jones. The great photo afterwards of them together at the hospital. But can I tell you my favorite thing about that particular fight, Chael? Several years later, 3 or so years later, I was interviewing Jon Jones, and this was after his hit-and-run accident. And he was talking about all the transgressions and all the mess-ups. And he told me that week in Toronto, he partied like he had never partied before a fight. He was driving miles away from the host hotel to go do stuff and party. And he told me when he was walking out that night for that fight, he told himself, I can't believe I'm about to lose my title. I can't believe I didn't take this seriously. I can't believe I did this to myself. So if you go back and watch the fight, you can try to see the doubt in his eyes and the fear. It's kind of there if you know the story and look at it. In the end, he wins it. I just love the drama in that fight from start to finish.
And Ariel, that was one of the nights where everybody else that wanted to fight Jon Jones, everybody else in the division stood back and goes, oh no. Because here was the belief on Jon Jones. We recognized he was the best fighter. So then the question was, well, is he the toughest? If it's true that he's partying like he admits, if it's true that he's not in the gym and focused in training as his teammates will state behind his back, then it must also be true that should this fight go long and get gritty and dirty, he simply can't hold up. I mean, that's just logic. False. Turned out Jon Jones was the best fighter and the toughest fighter, and you never have to be both, Ariel. You can win world and Olympic championships either being the best or being the toughest. Nobody's ever the both. Jon Jones proved how tough he is in that fight with Gus.
The other one that comes to mind, of course, UFC 139. At least for me, your guy, Dan Henderson, Shogun, who what an amazing fight. They had a second one as well, but the first one, to me, one of the all-time greats. Chael, this was a lot of fun. Thank you for joining me. You don't often join me on a Monday. This is good on a Monday. We should do this on Mondays and Wednesdays. Maybe we should do it every day. Who knows?
I appreciate it, Helwani. By the way, I want to tell you, just so I get my credit, about 5 minutes ago, my earpiece went out. I've been happy to read your lips. I think I've done a good job. I think I've answered your questions. But if for any reason I went in a direction you didn't take me, now you know why. I'm not that good of a lip reader.
Wow, this is amazing. So kind of like every Wednesday, you don't actually listen to what I have to say. You just go in, for yourself and do the business on your own, and you kind of live on the island. You did a great job. I don't even know if you hear me now. Do you hear me? Yes?
I don't answer questions, Helwani. I handle questions. So it really, in the words of The Rock, it doesn't matter what you said, Helwani.
Hello, everyone. It's Ariel Helwani. I just came here to thank you for watching our ESPN YouTube channel. It's the best. You know what else is the best? The ESPN app. You can get highlights, analysis, all that stuff and more. And if you want premium content and live streaming sports, there's only one place for all of that. It's ESPN Plus.